Stratocracy. If you have a country that thinks elections are too much of a hassle and simply hand the keys to the Oval Office to the military, you have a stratocracy. It's essentially a government where absolute power belongs to the military instead of the people. So instead of politicians arguing all day, generals and officers run the show. There are no debates, no campaigns, just strict orders and people yelling, "Drop and give me 20." If you like a government that never misses a march, this is it. In a stratocracy, the military is not just protecting the country, but is the country. Leaders don't climb the ranks by making speeches, they do it by following orders, surviving battles, and knowing how to keep people in line. Civilians can complain all they want, but they better start doing push-ups if they want to be in charge. Ancient Sparta was a classic example. Their government was basically one big military camp. Everyone trained for war from childhood. Rome had similar moments as well. When things got messy, generals took charge because nothing says problem solved like putting a guy in armor in charge. But unlike a military dictatorship where one person grabs power and refuses to let go, a stratocracy is an actual system. It's like the military never clocks out. In places like Myanmar, the army didn't just take over for a bit, but made themselves part of the government, as if they found a chair and decided to keep it forever. Accelerationism. Imagine having an old rundown house. You hire someone to fix it, but they tell you the only way to fix this house is to take a bulldozer and turn it into dust. That's similar to how accelerationism works. It's the idea that if a system is broken, the best way to fix it is to break it even more until something new takes its place. There are two main types of accelerationism. Left-wing accelerationists think capitalism will collapse if it keeps running wild, like a hamster that refuses to stop spinning its wheel until it passes out. That's why they want machines to replace human jobs, so the system falls apart and something fairer can take over. Meanwhile, right-wing accelerationists believe pushing society into chaos will give them a chance to rebuild things in their own way, like knocking over all the chess pieces to restart the game when you're losing. But this idea is not just about politics, because some people apply it to technology, thinking if we build AI and robots as fast as possible, humans will get to retire early. Others see it in culture, saying the more extreme everything gets, such as more ads, noise, and nonsense, the sooner people will snap out of it and demand a better way to live. Libertarianism. Libertarianism is the idea that we should be as free as possible without the government breathing down our necks. It's like staying up all night to play video games without your parents telling you it's lights off. Libertarians believe people can make their own choices and don't need a babysitter in a suit telling them what to do. One of the first things libertarians want is to lower taxes because they think you should keep your money instead of handing it over to a government that might spend it on something ridiculous, like nukes and fancy tanks. They believe that giving a big chunk of your income to the government is like paying for a meal and then watching someone eat half of it. When it comes to the economy, libertarians love free markets. They think businesses should compete without too many government rules. If a company sells bad products or treats people terribly, customers will stop buying from it. There is no need for endless regulations when bad businesses can sink on their own ship. Libertarians also care a lot about personal freedom. They believe you should have the right to own what you want, say what you want, and live how you want. If you want to build a giant statue of yourself in the front yard, that's your call. As long as you're not hurting anyone, they think the government should stay out of it. Minarchism. Imagine going on a diet where you only eat the absolute essentials and have no room for steak and ice cream. That's similar to what Minarchism believes the government should be. It's essentially putting the government on a strict diet to slim it down and minimize its functions and power. This ideology wants the government to be as small as possible and handle the things it needs to handle, like crime, defense, and legal matters. As to everything else, the government should tell us to figure things out ourselves, like throwing a toddler into a swimming pool to teach them to swim. So if you want roads, you better start learning how cement works. The reason for this belief is that minarchists think too much government is like putting 10 locks on your front door, because it slows everything down, costs too much, and makes life harder. Instead of politicians deciding how to spend your money, you keep it and choose for yourself. If something is important, businesses or charities will step up because people will pay for what they actually need. In this case, the government's job is to protect rights instead of micromanaging your life like it's playing a game of Sims. That means cops to catch criminals, courts to settle arguments, and a military to keep invaders from crashing the party. Some minarchists also accept basic public infrastructure, but the goal is to still keep the government. This makes minarchism the distant yet more organized cousin of anarchism. Anarchists want no government at all, like a game with no rules. On the other hand, minarchists believe we still need a referee if we don't want the game to get messy. The government should exist only to stop chaos and keep things fair. Too much control is bad, but no control at all could turn into a wild free-for-all where everyone is throwing punches and elbows. Absurdism. Let's say you're playing a video game with no instructions on how to win. You look around, hoping for a sign, only for the game to keep you guessing for dozens of hours. But you still play it anyway. That's what absurdism is in action. It's the idea that life has no clear meaning. But that doesn't mean you should quit and unalive yourself. This idea comes from Albert Camus, a French philosopher who said that life is weird and you must deal with it. He believed you have three choices. You can quit, pretend there's a grand plan, or accept the chaos and keep going. Camus thought the best option was to embrace the absurd and just live. It's like realizing the roller coaster has no brakes, but deciding to enjoy the ride anyway. He explained this using the story of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was punished by pushing a giant rock up a hill, only for it to roll back down every time. This goes on forever. Most people would give up or start screaming at the rock, but Camus said Sisyphus should just accept it and maybe even smile. If you're stuck in a loop, at least make it entertaining. But absurdism is not the same as nihilism. Nihilism is like throwing the controller at the screen when you can't win the video game. Absurdism is staying in the game, even if the rules make no sense. Instead of despair, you get freedom. That means absurdism isn't despair in action, but is basically embracing the absurd, where life may be nonsense, but still fun. Georgism. It may sound like a religion where you worship a dude named George, but Georgism is actually the idea that land should belong to everyone. So instead of a few people owning land and getting rich because of the finders keepers rule, there shouldn't be any losers weeping because they don't own real estate. Henry George came up with this in the 1800s after looking around and realizing some people were getting rich just by sitting on land, while others were struggling. He basically said that no one created land, meaning no one should own it. Imagine claiming ownership of the sky and making people pay rent for air. Georgism says land ownership without sharing its value is just as silly. The solution is a land value tax. Instead of taxing paychecks or businesses, Georgism says to tax land value. If a piece of land is valuable because it's in a busy city, that value comes from the people living and working there, not from the owner sitting in a fancy chair. So the tax would ensure that extra wealth helps everyone, instead of making landowners rich for holding dirt like it's gold. Without this tax, people hoard land like a rare Pokemon card, waiting for prices to skyrocket. Georgism says use it or pay up. This would make housing cheaper, stop empty lots from gathering dust, and give cities more money to work with. This means owners would have to use their land productively, instead of sitting on it like a dragon hoarding gold. Some places have tried this and found it works pretty well. Taiwan, parts of Australia, and some US cities have used versions of it. Even famous economists, who usually cannot agree on anything, have said this makes sense. The idea is not about taking away land, but ensuring no one gets a free ride just because they were lucky enough to own a valuable spot. Locavorism. Eating local doesn't mean eating the locals in your neighborhood. It simply means eating food grown near where they live. That's what locavorism promotes. Instead of eating food that needs to fly halfway across the world to end up on your plate, you eat food grown by local farmers. The main goal is to help small farmers make a living, know where food comes from, and avoid eating something that has traveled more than most people in a year. When you buy from big grocery stores, a lot of money disappears into corporate pockets. But buying local means farmers get paid fairly, and food isn't older than the person buying it. Plus, there's something nice about knowing the person who grew your food instead of arriving with a sticker saying made in China. Another benefit is less pollution. Food that travels thousands of miles burns a ridiculous amount of fuel. Local food skips the road trip and lands on your plate fresher with fewer preservatives. It also comes with less plastic, so you won't end up unwrapping a single apple like a birthday present. Despite its benefits, locavorism isn't a very popular idealism because it can be too expensive and inconvenient. Local food can cost more, and not every place grows everything. If you live in Alaska, you might as well eat snow all day. Distributism. Distributism is the idea that wealth and property should be spread out like butter on toast, instead of clumped up in one corner where only a few people get the good bits. It was dreamed up by thinkers like G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc, who looked at capitalism and socialism and decided both systems had serious issues. Capitalism lets a few rich people hoard everything, like a squirrel preparing for the apocalypse. At the same time, socialism hands too much control to the government, which has the efficiency of an old man climbing a staircase. That's where distributism comes in to fix those problems. It loves small businesses, local farms, and worker-owned companies. Imagine a world where most people own a shop, some land, or a piece of a cooperative. You don't have to wait for a CEO in a penthouse to decide your fate because you and your neighbors run things together. Less corporate nonsense means more control over your own life. Private property is key in this ideology, but it differs from how billionaires collect mansions like souvenirs. Unlike socialism, distributism doesn't want the government to take everything and run it like a car without an engine. Meanwhile, unlike capitalism, it doesn't want a handful of tycoons owning everything while the rest of us eat instant noodles 3 times a day. Instead, it's all about ensuring wealth isn't stuck at the top like a vending machine snack that refuses to fall. It also believes in guilds and cooperatives, which are basically work clubs where people help each other instead of backstabbing their way to the top. You don't have companies treating workers like disposable coffee cups because everyone has a stake in the business's success. As to local economies, instead of relying on giant supply chains that break at the worst times, people should produce what they need closer to home. That means fewer middlemen hiking up prices and fewer products traveling across the planet just to arrive broken. Technogaianism. When you think of the future, you might think of millions of flying cars in the air in a world where trees are extinct. And this seems to be the direction technology is following, like it's a bad social media trend. But Technogaianism tries to flip the script by saying that advancing technology doesn't mean burning every tree and waiting until the planet becomes too unlivable for us to fly to Mars. Instead, it is the idea that technology can fix the planet instead of wrecking it. Technogaians believe that instead of running away from modern life, we should use our best inventions to clean up our own mess. That's why Technogaianism loves things like solar panels, wind turbines, and nuclear energy, because these don't fill the air with pollution. Instead of telling people to live in caves and eat moss, Technogaians want to make cities smarter, farms greener, and energy cleaner. Some even support lab-grown meat, which means future burgers might come from a science lab instead of a cow. Geoengineering is also a big part of this ideology. If the Earth is overheating, Technogaianism suggests cooling it down with giant mirrors in space, or machines that suck carbon out of the air like a vacuum for bad decisions. Unlike environmentalists who believe humans should live simpler lives and ditch their smartphones and big cars, Technogaians say innovation is the way forward. Instead of giving up modern comforts, they want technology and nature to get along. They just want a future where forests grow, the air is clean, and nobody has to cook dinner over a pile of twigs. Secularism. Secularism is the idea that religion and government should not mix, like oil and water or raisins and cookies. The government does not pick a favorite religion, and no one gets to make laws based on texts written 4,000 years ago. People can believe whatever they want, but the law plays fair with everyone. The goal of secularism is to keep things fair. Imagine playing a game where one player keeps changing the rules because their book says so. That would not be fun. Secularism ensures no one sneaks extra rules into the system just because they think their beliefs should be everyone's. Secularism actually also helps religion. History shows that if one religion takes over the government, things tend to get messy. Today's winner can become tomorrow's outlaw. Secularism keeps everyone safe from that chaos, letting people pray, not pray, or meditate on the meaning of life without worrying about the government barging in and telling them they're worshiping the wrong god. Secularism also applies to schools. Public schools do not take sides in religious matters because nothing ruins recess like an argument about whose beliefs should be on the test. Everyone learns science, math, and history without one group claiming they have all the answers because their great-great-grandfather wrote them down. But one tricky part of secularism is deciding where to draw the line. Some people think religious symbols should be allowed everywhere, while others want them kept out of government spaces. These debates are like deciding the perfect way of cooking a steak, because someone always thinks well done is better than medium rare. Eco-fascism. Imagine loving your garden so much that you decide to bulldoze your neighbors to make room for more flowers. That is a lot like eco-fascism, which happens when someone cares about trees but not people. This extreme belief says saving the planet is more important than human rights. Instead of fixing pollution or cutting waste, eco-fascists blame overpopulation and immigration, as if banning people from moving will somehow clean the ocean. The problem is that eco-fascism takes a good idea, like protecting nature, and twists it into something awful. It's like deciding to stop littering by getting rid of all the people who drop trash, instead of making better trash rules. While regular environmentalism is about fixing problems without treating people like disposable napkins, eco-fascism skips all that and jumps straight to let's control people, rather than holding polluting industries accountable. If a factory dumps oil into a river, it ignores it. But if a family moves to a new country, it suddenly causes all environmental problems. This thinking isn't new because some Nazi leaders actually blamed other races for messing the world up. Meanwhile, today's eco-fascists have the same mindset. They say rich countries should close borders to protect the environment, while those same countries pump out the most pollution. It's like setting your house on fire and blaming the wind for spreading the flames.